His Imperial and Royal Highness Edward Habsburg, who is my first guest with us straight off the bat. Archduke Edward, thank you very much for joining us. Hungarian ambassador to the Holy See. I see you're dressed accordingly today. I assume you didn't dress that way specifically for the show, but thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I am dressed that way because you really catch me just before leaving for the Vatican, where Pope Francis is going to present the bull today to prepare the Holy Year next year. So the ambassadors have to appear in their working clothes, in their working outfit. And our working outfit is this white tie with decorations. So you really caught me on the jump, and I decided to present myself in my working outfit.
I absolutely love it. Restore traditions, keep them going. Now, your book has been doing very well. I've seen you talking about it across the media, so I really wanted to get you on to talk about it on this show as well, on the Common Sense Crusade, because I think it's more relevant here than anywhere else. We're trying to, we hold on to that tradition. We try to put Christ back into the center of the public conversations. Now, your book, as I understand it, covers your family history, but I think it's relevant not just for you and your family, but for the rest of Christendom who want to maintain tradition and good sense and good common values.
Yes, it has been called a Habsburg self-help book. And it is, in a way, you will learn Habsburg family history. You will get to know the key players of our family history over the last 800 years. But you will get to know the 7 core principles that I believe shaped our family. And while writing this book, I realized that many of these principles seem to have disappeared in our current times. So I thought it was timely to present them for today's world.
I like it. Much like what Jordan Peterson did with his 12 rules, you've got a Habsburg 7 rules for life, for the family. Now, this obviously is about your family, but it could be for the institution of the family itself, couldn't it? Which Western society seems to be disregarding en masse. And I would say that the family is the first and foremost important aspect of the Christian life. Now, can we go through a few of your rules, a few of your principles, starting with get married and have lots of children?
Yes, I put this at the first place because if you think of the Habsburg family, the first thing you think about usually is large family, lots of kids, generations of marriages with many, many children. I think this is something like the unique selling point of the Habsburgs. And I believe, being myself a father of 6 children with a very courageous wife and 1 grandchild now, I can talk about the joys and the happiness that a big family brings, a numerous family brings. I believe that people should get married. I believe that people should have lots of children. And I also believe, it's a bit controversial nowadays, that they should have children soon in their marriage and not just go ahead and have a few years of doing other things. But if you get married and you found a spouse for life, you want to have children. It makes your life better. It makes, between the spouses, it makes the life for the children better. You will have a close-knit community that will carry you all your life. And I'm pretty proud of my 6 children. When I'm in Europe and I tell people I have 6 children, they freak out. They say, ah. But when I go to the States and I meet conservative evangelicals, Catholics, and they will tell you, oh, 6, not bad. I mean, yeah. And then they tell you that they have 8, 9, or 10 children. This is something totally unthinkable here in Europe, but I want to encourage people to have lots of children. Maria Theresia had 16 children. Her son, Leopold, had 16 children. This is, of course, a very high number, and I don't want to suggest for everybody to do that nowadays, but be daring, be courageous, go out there and have a large family.
Yes, Your Excellency. My father had 14 brothers and sisters. It still can be done. In
yes,
your book,
absolutely.
You talk about this as almost a political thing, though. You talk about your family using marriage and starting families in order to spread the family, the Habsburg family, which is a very smart thing to do. But in the context of the 21st century, I think perhaps it's a thing for Christians to do, to get married and have families in order to spread the gospel and to go forth and multiply, which brings me on to your second principle of be Catholic and practice your faith.
Yes, I believe I wouldn't know how someone could live a lifelong, happy and fulfilled marriage without sharing your faith. I think this is the thing that carries you. This is the pole you hold on to. This is what brings you to lifelong happiness, and then in the end, of course, to heaven, which is what we are all there for. And therefore, I believe if you get married, you should find a spouse that shares your faith. Even better, find a devout spouse, and as I would say, find a Catholic spouse, because the Catholic moral teaching, the Catholic teaching on sexuality and marriage are the best system to guarantee, and I really say guarantee, a lifelong, fulfilling, happy marriage. So faith is a key ingredient. We are here on earth to get to know God, love our neighbor, and get to heaven. And as Emperor Charles, the last Habsburg emperor and the only blessed in our family, said on the eve of his marriage to his future wife, now we'll have to help each other into heaven. I think that is the definition of a Christian marriage. And that was normal for the Habsburgs, and I want it to be normal again in the 21st century.
I love it. I think we often see in statistics that where the husband is faithful, the rest of the family is faithful too. It's very important for the man to have that faith and to bring his family along with him. Now, you also talk about believing in the empire and in subsidiarity. In a modern context, I suppose subsidiarity may mean kind of devolution down to the lowest denominator, so that people in the local area are responsible for local responsibilities, right?
Yes, I mean that I believe that the history of the Habsburg Empire and before that of the Holy Roman Empire has a lot of lessons for today's world. And I think, for instance, that the current European Union could take a page out of our book, because one of the core criteria of the Habsburgs will always treat the lower levels, that is the single nations within the empire, with lots of respect their mores, respect their legal institutions, respect their parliaments. And whenever the Habsburgs did that well, the empire flourished. And whenever the Habsburgs tried to centralize and to pull everything to a central institution and not respect the lower level, subsidiarity, it went wrong. And that is a strong lesson for today's world. And it is the absolute antidote to globalism. It's the antidote to a world being ruled by higher and higher and higher levels, very far divided from democratic rules and very far divided from the normal man on the street, who doesn't understand anymore how these things work. So this is a lesson to be learned while reading my book.
I think it's a very important lesson. I think a lot of people feel disenfranchised across the West at the moment. They feel like governments are getting bigger, subsuming more power. And as you mentioned, big global conglomerates like the European Union, we've also got the World Economic Forum and World Health Organization. Lots of big NGOs are subsuming a lot of power. And the common man seems to feel disenfranchised, which means that there's less respect for the law, there's less respect for policies and justice. And your fourth point is stand for law and justice.
Yes. I while reading the history of the Habsburgs, and I really went through all the biographies of the main rulers in our family, but also of the lesser archdukes who were sent to look after a part of the empire. There was always a strong desire to be just, to let justice rule, to be there for your subjects, to serve your subjects. At some point, for instance, one of the Habsburg emperors in the 19th century, beginning of 19th, said to his Hungarian subjects, I am your emperor, but I give you the permission to take up arms against me if I don't respect your laws and if I don't respect justice. So this is sort of the agreement between the ruler and his subjects. I as a ruler will look after your rights and your laws, and then you have fealty to me. So that is something that I think got a bit lost also nowadays, and I would strongly suggest to take this principle back into our current politics.
I love that. That reminds me of servant leadership, which our Lord modelled best, obviously. But of course, Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II of England also has exemplified that, of knowing her place to serve her citizens and her subjects, but also that she's accountable to God. And I think that responsibility has to work both ways to provide balance. Your fifth point is know who you are and live accordingly.
That's my invitation to take tradition seriously. I mean, you see, I'm sitting here in a very old-fashioned outfit, and the Habsburgs always took tradition very seriously. They took the principles of tradition, they translated them into their times over the centuries, but they had a very strong respect for. And we live in a time where our current technocratical rulers try to convince us that all of us are alone, all of us are glued to the screen, and all of us can reinvent themselves every 5 minutes. Tomorrow you can be something else than you were yesterday. And I go in the other direction. I encourage everybody to find their roots, to find what gives them hope and values, to find what their parents stood for, what their family stood for, to find these traditional roots of yourself, and living accordingly will make you happy. And that's what the Habsburgs always did. And I suggested to everybody today, stand up, be countercultural, don't do what everybody else does.
That's so important because we live in a society where both on the left and the right of politics, people are losing their identity. On the left, collectivism and communism is making people be labeled into boxes that doesn't suit them. On the right, individualism is breaking people apart from community. Somewhere in the middle, the Christian faith says we have a responsibility to our family, our community, to our nation, and of course to God. And that's so important to remember. And if we remember that, then we can fight the good fight. We can stand firm in the faith. And your sixth point is relevant to be brave in battle.
Yes. Well, I in this chapter, I mostly speak about those Habsburgs who are strong and courageous on the battlefield. There are a few very shining examples. And in fact, in two or three of the most important battles of the European history, Lepanto and of course the Siege of Vienna in 1683, Habsburgs played a key role, and in two very different ways. Don Juan de Austria on the battlefield as the leader of the fleet and fighting alongside his men, and Emperor Leopold of Austria, he was not a soldier and a fighting man, but he was a diplomat. And the sub-rule is, or have a great general fighting for you. And Leopold made an agreement with the King Jan Sobieski of Poland to help each other when the Turks would come. And that's why in 1683, the Siege of Vienna was broken, and that was the last big attack of the Ottoman Empire into the heart of Europe. And up to the last Habsburg emperor, this friendly, gently family father, Blessed Emperor Karl, he was in the trenches, he was on the battlefields, he saw action in the war before he became emperor, which of course led him to be courageous, to be very courageous, and we have lots of testimonies for this, but also to seek peace as much as he could the moment he was emperor. And he was even maligned for that. But so that's a chapter. Most of us probably won't be on a battlefield nowadays, but you can be courageous in many situations. For instance, taking a stand in the public sphere, taking a stand on Twitter for your principles and for faith, with the danger, of course, of being cancelled. And something you know perhaps more about, Calvin. And it's easier for a diplomat.
Yes. No, I think you're right. The battlefield has changed, but we are still in battle, and it's important to remember that. I like the parallel there between your story and what we see today, because Poland and Hungary still seem to be strong. They still seem to be quite brave. And I think that's because they've held on to these traditions and Christian values in many ways where we, perhaps Great Britain, haven't. Now, your last point is to die well and have a memorable funeral.
Yeah. One of the things I realized when I wrote this book is there is a reason why the Habsburgs are associated with great funerals. I would like to tell two examples that illuminate that. One of them is, of course, the famous knocking ritual, which is a ritual that goes back very, very far into the Baroque times in different shapes. But the way that I experienced it twice was when Empress Zita, the last Empress of Austria, was buried in very Republican times in 1991, I think, or 89, I don't know. And I saw it once more when Otto, the son of the last emperor, was buried. Very impressive. And the coffin arrives at the door of the Capuchin crypt in the center of Vienna. And then the master of ceremony knocks at the door and says, and the voice from inside, the monk says, "Who is there?" And then they read out all the titles of the emperor, which is Emperor of Austria, King of Hungary, King of Croatia, King of Bohemia, Prince of, and it's like half a minute of titles. And then the voice says, we don't know him. And then they knock again, and this time they read out all the achievements of the defunct emperor, and again the voice says, we don't know him. And the third knocking, they say, Zita, a poor sinful woman. And then the door opens. And I think the Habsburgs stylized their funerals in a way that they were a sermon, that they encouraged people to live a humble Christian life, and that even their emperor was just a poor sinner, needy of God's grace. That's one story, and the other one that I always like to tell, and which most people don't know, is that the story of how Marie Antoinette died. Now, most people know about Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, that she apparently was supposed to have said, let them eat cake, which she never did. That's a far older story that has been applied to her, but it has happened far before that. But most of all, that she was this sort of slightly elegant, luxurious wife of the last French king before the French Revolution. I blame Sophia Coppola for that, and film about Marie Antoinette. But she was a devout woman. She got perhaps a bit lost over the years in the courtly life of Paris. But when she was in prison awaiting her execution, she was incredibly devout. She always prayed in front of a crucifix that still exists nowadays, and I've seen it. And then we have a very clear description of her last 20 minutes by the executioner of Paris, Charles-Henri Sanson, from an old family of executioners. And you should read his book once. He wrote an autobiography of La Terreur, of his executing nearly everybody among the famous people of the revolution, and also, of course, the king and the queen of France. And he describes how she sat on his cart, rolling through the streets of Paris towards Place de la Concorde, and was incredibly nervous and unhappy, and looked around all the time at the houses left and right, and he didn't understand what was going on. And then they drove past one house, and she was in total peace and remained in peace until she was beheaded by him. So afterwards, when he returned home, he looked at that house. There was nothing special there. And after the revolution, underground Catholics told him, of course, it was absolutely forbidden for a priest faithful to Rome to be seen even in Paris, because they were immediately caught and executed. And her judges had forbidden her to go to confession before her death, which for a Catholic at that time was a real problem. Nowadays, of course, we believe that everybody goes to heaven immediately, but the Habsburgs were so naive to think that they had to go to the sacraments to make it to heaven. I'm being a bit ironic here. And she was terrified of going to her death without being able to receive the sacrament of reconciliation. And so underground Catholics heard about that and let her know that they smuggled a bishop into Paris, and that they hid this bishop at a window in a house where her cart would roll by. And she was looking for that hidden bishop in the window. And the moment she saw him and he gave her the general absolution, she was in total peace. And while going to her death, so you see how important for the Habsburgs a good and well-prepared death was. And the sacraments were definitely part of that. I said at some point that I could have put that chapter in the beginning of the book, because the Habsburgs always lived with their eyes to the last moment of their life, with their eyes towards death, knowing that they would have to render accountability to God one day, and therefore they wanted to prepare well. And I suggest this to everybody: live with the knowledge of your death. Don't try to push it aside. It will transform your life.
What a fantastic story. That is something that the Catholic faith teaches us, that we need to die well, and we need to be prepared for death. And it's not something to run from. It's not something to hide from, as the secular world tells us to avoid suffering, to avoid death. The faith teaches us to die well. And that's a wonderful story. Thank you for that. And on a relevant topic, I know you've been kind of promoting this local cult of Cardinal, I might not pronounce this right, Mindszenty?
Mindszenty.
Thank you.
It's practically impossible.
Tell us a bit about it and what this cult is.
It's impossible to pronounce Hungarian words well if you haven't lived in Hungary. Yes, he is a real hero, because first he stood up against Nazism in Hungary, then against communism, went into prison for both. And then he suffered in prison. He was liberated in 1956, fled into the American embassy, and stayed there until he was finally able to get out of Hungary. And then until he died, he went around the world and preached, was a pastor. And I am really asking everybody to pray for the beatification of this great, humble, wonderful, devout cardinal. He is already venerable. Pope Francis was generous enough to recognize his heroic virtues, which is the step before beatification. But what we need now would be a miracle. So if you go to my Twitter account, I posted a prayer card with a prayer. And if you have a very desperate cause in your family, or a health thing, or someone dying, or something of that kind, and you want to make a novena, 9 days of prayer, and pray in the name and on the intercession of Cardinal Mindszenty for that person, and should you have God listening to those prayers, please let me know via Twitter direct message. We live in the 21st century. You don't have to use the address that we give there, but I am directly reachable via Twitter direct message. And we would like to bring that cause ahead. I believe that Pope Francis likes Mindszenty very much. There is about 1.5 million people praying for Minszenty's beatification in Hungary as we speak. And I went to a pilgrimage in Hungary 4 days ago, where several thousand people came a pilgrimage to Minszenty's in honor of his day of death, and 500 children on bicycle made a pilgrimage for this Minszenty date. So I'm full of hope, but I would count on the help of your followers, your friends, to pray and get Minszenty across the finishing line to become a blessed of the Church.
Well, I am praying for Minszenty's beatification, and I hope our followers will too.
I add that I'm not only the ambassador of Hungary to the Holy See, but also the president of the Minszenty Foundation, who is promoting the cause of Minszenty. So I'm doing this with 2 hats on right now.
I understand you have many, many hats, Your Excellency. You're downplaying it there. I know you've got an event to get to, so I'll let you go, but I just want you to plug your book. What's the name of the book, and where should people go to find out more about it?
Book is called The Habsburg Way, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times. If you Google Edward Habsburg and the word way, you will immediately drop onto it. You can find it, of course, in your internet provider of choice, or you can go to Sophia Press homepage, but I would only suggest that if you are in the States. So The Habsburg Way, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times. It's not a big door stopper. It's a light little read, but it gives you a few ideas, I think, practical things to change in your life.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, and thank you for your time today. God bless you, and I hope your event goes well.
Thank you for having me on the show. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching my Common Sense Crusade. If you'd like to watch the whole show, you can subscribe to lotuseaters.com for as little as £5 per month, and then you get access to a bank of content as well. My show is 3 p.m. every Thursday. See you there. Deus Vult.